Well, hello everyone. This is Mitchell Moat, an extension agent with the University of Tennessee and the Tennessee State University Extension Program here in Rutherford County. And today I'm bringing you episode number 4 of What's Wrong Now. And this series is just to look at some problems that you may likely find in your landscape and in your garden today. We're going to start today's episode, though, first of all, by talking about something that's not wrong right now. Someone sent a picture of this little critter the other day and also had 4 or 5 different phone calls about such critters this past week. Well, I'm happy to report that this is not a murder hornet. I know that has been in the news some back earlier in the spring, and is probably still circulating around out there that yes, there is a thing called an Asian giant hornet, also known as a murder hornet, that was detected in Washington State back sometime last year. And so, but folks have seen some things they thought might be a murder hornet, but this is not one of them. We don't have them yet here in this part of the world. Now, what this is, though, is a thing called a cicada killer wasp. Cicada killer wasps are solitary ground nesting wasps, and they show up annually here in our part of the world in this July to August time frame. They are large. They're kind of in the 2-inch range, and they do resemble the images of the murder hornets that were circulated along online earlier this year. The females will build a nest burrow in the ground. They're a ground nesting wasp, but they're solitary, so there's only one female per nest. They don't have they don't have a communal nest like, say, red wasp, paper wasp would. Now, the females will build burrows in close proximity to one another, so there can be multiple nests very close together, but they're still just solitary. There's only one female per nest. Now, they're called cicada killers because that's what they do. They catch cicadas, just as the one pictured in this photograph is doing, and they kill those and they take them back to their nest burrows and they feed those things to their young. The females can sting, but they must be seriously provoked in order to do so. In all my years, I've never met an individual that was stung by a cicada killer wasp. Now, they will often nest in flower beds or gardens where the soil has been worked, so it's a little softer and it's easier for them to burrow in. And they will certainly fly around people, around their heads and so on. If you're out working in a flower bed where some of these cicada killers are nesting, they'll certainly fly around and get close to you, and they can certainly appear intimidating because they are so large. But again, they just about have to be forced to sting you. I'm sure that would be a painful sting because a wasp that big is bound to carry a painful sting, but that's not a real concern for us, and they do catch cicadas. So I just want to get that out of the way because we have had this week 4 or 5 folks that thought they'd caught a murder hornet, but no, these are the cicada killer wasps. All right, so let's continue on now with what is going wrong in the garden, in the landscape today. Brown patch disease is probably the most common fungal disease of tall fescue in our part of the world. Now, brown patch will affect other turf grasses, but it is really the primary one for tall fescue. This is, and people will notice that there's something wrong. They're maintaining a tall fescue lawn, and they'll walk out one morning or maybe some afternoon, and they'll notice these brown patches that are starting to show up in the grass. They may start off relatively small in size, but maybe a circular shaped brown patch in an otherwise nice green turf out there. And they may notice that there are multiple of those, not just one out there. Well, chances are really good if you maintain a tall fescue lawn and you're seeing these brown patches show up, it is from the brown patch disease. Now, brown patch is a fungal disease. It's an opportunistic disease. It thrives under conditions of heat and humidity. Well, guess what? I don't have to tell you that in July and parts of June, we've certainly had our share of heat and humidity. It's a very classic disease on the turf grass. This picture was taken on July 31st down at Rockvale. This is tall fescue. And you can see the brown lesions here on the foliage with a dark margin. The brown lesions on the leaf blades with that darker margin is a textbook classic symptom of brown patch disease. Now, these patches may first start off as relatively small in size, kind of circular in shape, but they can expand in size from day to day. And if there are numerous small patches that are growing near one another, they can grow together to form one large patch that can be measured in terms of feet, maybe 3 feet across, 4 feet across, instead of just inches across. The fungus is typically most active during the evening hours while the sun is down, and that's when the spots are going to expand their perimeters. They're going to get larger. Now, another key identifying characteristic of brown patch is this. This is called the smoke ring. You see this grayish whitish colored ring, kind of a smoky looking ring around the perimeter of this brown patch. Well, this is actually the fungus actively growing. This grayish white material is the mycelium of that brown patch fungus, and it is spreading, it is growing. And again, this typically happens in the evening while the sun is down, and that fungus is spreading. That's how those patches enlarge. But when you see, if you're not sure by looking at the lesions, when you see this smoke ring appearance, and you're apt to find it earlier in the morning before the sun dries the dew off, then that's pretty well a dead giveaway that that is brown patch disease. Now, I think, we're typically mostly worried about this disease on grasses that we maintain as a turf grass, but when you find brown patch disease attacking weed grasses like crabgrass, I think that's a good indicator to you that disease pressure and conditions that favor this disease is pretty high. So what we see here is a picture of a patch of crabgrass that sure enough is infected by brown patch disease. This was taken on the same day as the tall fescue brown patch picture was on July the 31st. And you can see that very distinctive ring-shaped a round circular patch appearance is a classic of brown patch. And here is a shot of it early in the morning, and you can see those mycelium. They're attacking the crabgrass leaf tissue just like they would the tall fescue tissue. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, just want to point out that when you see brown patch attacking things like crabgrass and so on, that tells you that disease pressure is really high and conditions that favor that disease are running rampant right now. And we certainly had those conditions throughout most of the month of July. And here's a close-up shot of that same patch, and you can see the same lesions on the crabgrass leaves look just about like the same or almost the same as those on the tall fescue patch, on the tall fescue grass leaves. The symptoms are almost the same. Now, there are fungicides that can be used to control brown patch. It is a fungal disease. There are several different fungicides that are labeled for homeowners to use against brown patch. Look for products that have active ingredients such as miclobutanil, propiconazole, thiophanate methyl, azoxystrobin, mancozeb, along with some others. Now, there are a lot of different brands, and multiple brands can use these different active ingredients, but these are the ingredients you're looking for. Now, fungicides are, sometimes people mistakenly think that fungicides are going to cure a disease, but they really do a better job of protecting clean or uninfected leaf tissue or plant tissue from the disease. So to have a successful fungicide or a brown patch, any fungal disease treatment program, prevention program, application of the fungicide should probably begin at the first sign of the disease, or to be more proactive, just when conditions that favor that disease development occur. And remember, for brown patch disease, the conditions that favor disease development are heat and humidity. Nighttime temperatures stay in the upper 70s, lower 80s. We got a really high dew point. Adequate moisture, that's a good indicator that conditions favor brown patch and other fungal disease development. To combat brown patch throughout a growing season, it's going to take multiple applications, because the fungicide products that are out there available for homeowners as well as professional use aren't the most, they don't have the longest period of residual compared to some of the other pesticide products. Probably on the high side, under the most ideal conditions, 21 to 28 days is the longest period of protection you might expect out of a fungicide. And depending on the product you're using and depending on the conditions, how much rain you're getting and other environmental conditions, it may be only 7 days. So applications can be called for on the label anywhere from every 7 days to every 21 days, just depending on the product and disease pressure. So you need to follow that label. read what the label tells you. If the dose rate is essential to get the correct dose rate out to do a good job of protecting whatever the crop is. In this case, we're talking about protecting our turf grass from brown patch. If it says to use 3 ounces of the product per 1,000 square feet, then that's what you need to use. Okay, be very precise with that. Also, pay attention to the intervals. Do you apply it every 10 days, every 14 days, etc.? And also pay attention to any precautions that may be found on the label. Some products may tell you that you should not apply them when temperatures are above 90 degrees or when temperatures are above 95 degrees, things like that. So you want to pay attention to those kinds of things. And also, it's a good idea to alternate between the types or the fungicide modes of action, okay, to help reduce the potential built resistance of that organism against the fungicide you're using. If the same fungicide product is used time and time and time again, it increases the opportunity for whatever the pathogen is you're trying to control to develop resistance against that fungicide. And if resistance occurs, then those future generations of that pathogen are going to be resistant to that fungicide, and it will no longer have any benefit at controlling that particular pathogen. So it's a good idea to rotate between different modes of action in that regard. This next picture we're going to look at is not so much a disease. This was a picture sent to me this past week from a homeowner here in Murfreesboro, the Rutherford County area, and he had this odd-looking growth out in the lawn on where he had a tree removed and the stump ground up. And in this mass of stuff, it starts off being kind of white colored, looks like little pearls almost, if you will, or beads growing out of the ground. And as they grow a little older, they take on a tan color. They open up like a cup. What is this? And he saw it growing in multiple locations on this shredded hardwood that was out there, the remnants of where a tree was removed. Well, this is a fungus. It's a mushroom, and it's something called a bird's nest fungi. And here you see it growing in this hardwood mulch or the remnants of that hardwood tree that was ground out. This is something that's referred to as a ballistic fungi. The reason it's called a ballistic fungi is that back up just a second. It's called a bird's nest fungi because you see when these mature, you'll see this cup-shaped structure here. The red arrow's pointing to it. You'll see them scattered around through here as well. You got some less mature ones that are still white colored, have it opened up. But so the cup is the nest of the bird's nest. Inside that cup are these black colored spores. Well, these are the eggs in the nest. So as I was saying, these are ballistic fungi. What that means is when these cups, when these structures get ripe or when they mature, they will fire or shoot when they're triggered. Very often it'll be raindrops will trigger them. Some physical action will trigger these things to fire, and they will shoot those spores up through the air some distance away from them. That's how these spores are spread. If there is if this is growing in a bed, if it were a flower bed, a mulch bed with shrubbery that was growing adjacent to a structure, be it a home or an office building, or next to a parking area where automobiles are parked, and with these things fire, those spores can land on the sides, the bumpers, and the sides of automobiles, also the sides of homes. These things are sticky. Now, they're just a little brown, or not any brown color, mostly a black color, dark color little spot, and they're sticky. And once they get dry, they are hard to remove. They're not a pathogen. They're not a parasite on plants, so they're not damaging the plants. They're not making the plant sick. They're not poisonous to people. I guess anybody could have a particular sensitivity to something, but as a rule, they're not problematic from a health concern to people or other plants or animals. But they are a nuisance. They are a pest because they can stick. These spores, when they fire, can stick onto the surfaces, like I said, of automobiles or siding on homes and that sort of thing. And honestly, it's a real pain to get off. I've seen several instances where people would bring in samples or send pictures of this black stuff all over the car, these spots, and you go and investigate. Sure enough, that's what it was. There's another one called an artillery fungus that looks similar to that. It is just a little bit different, but the premise is the same. They both will fire and shoot these spores out through the air, and wherever they land, if they land on something that they can stick to, they're going to do that. and again, it's hard to get it off. What can you do about it? Well, it's pretty simple. I mean, you take a shovel, you scoop these patches up when you see them, throw them over in a bag and get rid of them. Okay, you don't just leave them there and let them run their course. They're not harmful. Again, I wouldn't want to run them through the compost pile probably, but just scoop them up and get rid of them. You can go back and put fresh mulch in those places. Go to an inorganic mulch entirely. They're not. They have to grow in that hardwood mulch. They're just a fungi. That's part of that that will occur when that hardwood is decomposing. Go to a stone mulch, for example. You're not going to have an issue with it there. Or use an inorganic mulch that has less wood in it, something like pine straw or a bark nugget mulch. You're going to have less wood there, and it's not going to support the growth of a lot of these different fungi, including this bird's nest fungi. But it's kind of an interesting thing, and it's not something that we see every day, but it is something that we see probably every year, and that people will have it, and sometimes they'll see it and wonder what it is, never say anything about it. But here, this gentleman did send it to us, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to share it with other folks. They'd know what it is when they run across it. We're going to move now to some other plants. You go out in the vegetable garden, take a look at squash. What do you see? You see powdery mildew growing on the leaves of squash plants. You can see the grayish white powder on the surface of this squash leaf right here. You know, powdery mildew has been around for a while already this year, and it will attack a lot of different plants. You see it on plants in the vegetable garden. Here's an example of a dogwood that's got powdery mildew growing on the leaf surface there. Here's an example of a lilac that's just flat covered up with powdery mildew. And typically, as the season progresses, as we go into the latter part of the summer, it's just like the population of these fungal pathogens build up, and if you don't do something to stop it, they just get worse and worse as the time goes by. They're a fungicide. They are a fungus, okay? So powdery mildew is a fungus. So fungicides can be used to help control powdery mildew. Just like with the brown patch, a lot of different fungicides are labeled for homeowner use. Look for some of the active ingredients. Some are the same as what we used on turf grass. Not all of them are, but ingredients such as microbutanil, propiconazole, copper hydroxide, okay, copper-based fungicides, azoxystrobin, and others do have efficacy and can provide protection against powdery mildew. You would want to check the label for use on specific plants. You know, not all may be labeled for use on vegetables, and some may not be labeled for use on all ornamental plants, but you would want to check that. Just like with the brown patch disease, you know, you want to begin application of the fungicide against powdery mildew at the first sign of the disease, okay, or when conditions that favor disease development occur. Now, a difference between powdery mildew and the brown patch, it doesn't necessarily have to be all that moist. It does not require, powdery mildew doesn't require the same level of moisture maybe some of the other fungal diseases, so it can occur even in a drier environment. It is a fungus. The growing season, the infection season is long, so it's going to require multiple applications throughout the growing season. Alternating between modes of action is always a plus. And again, follow that label direction when it comes to making the correct dose rate, how often you should apply, precautions to use, whether it's heat precautions, etc. And if you're talking about edibles, if you're talking about vegetables or fruits, pay attention to the post-harvest interval. How long after application do you need to wait before you harvest that particular vegetable or that particular fruit crop? Some fungicides, there may not be any waiting period. Some may have a 3-day or 4-day or 5-day. So you just need to pay attention to that and you know, follow what your label directions are. Next is this is an example of a red oak sample that was sent in, brought into the office by one of the local landscape service providers. This red oak sample, you can see the lesions, the small lesions scattered here on the leaves, a little tiny little almost pinprick-like, so just a little dark spots, as well as some of the larger lesions with the necrotic tissue, the brown tissue. These are symptoms of a fairly common disease on oak trees, and this is called tubercular leaf spot. It will affect a number of different oaks, but for some reason, it seems to really like the red oaks. It's typically a late season disease. It shows up in the latter part of the summer, kind of in that late July up into August time frame. The good thing about it is typically there's not a treatment normally not recommended for this, because it does show up so late in the year that if it was a good, healthy, vigorous tree to start with, it's had leaves out long enough, it's been catching sunlight and photosynthesizing, making energy to put back in that root system, till it's going to be in good shape to come back again next year. It can be a problem if a tree was weak to start with and it has been defoliated early, consecutive, multiple consecutive years in a row, because that will certainly have an impact on the amount of energy this tree was able to generate, how much to create and store for the future. And then it can become an issue. And then fungicides can be used. A lot of those same fungicides we've mentioned earlier are going to have efficacy against this disease also. But generally, it's not recommended that you treat those. One interesting thing about this is that oaks that are growing in on a soil that has a high pH may be more vulnerable, and the disease may be more severe on them than those growing on a soil that has a more desirable pH. Somewhere in that between the 7 and the 6.2, 6.3 range. But on a high pH, you're talking about pH is above 7. Okay. Well, so what's the problem with that? Well, if an oak tree is growing on the soil with a pH, a high pH, more of a basic pH, when it's higher than 7, very often the leaf tissue is going to be chlorotic to begin with. Instead of being a dark green color, there'll be a pale, lemony lime green color. And the reason for that is that when the pH is high, iron that's in the soil, which is essential for plants, is not available for plant uptake. It may be there, but the plants can't take it out of the ground because the pH is too high and it's locked up because of that soil chemistry. And that makes them a little bit more vulnerable and for something like this tubercular leaf spot. And it looks worse on them for whatever reason. When it does infect that tissue, it can the symptoms may seem more severe on one of those oak trees, especially a red oak growing in a high pH environment. So if it's part of a management program, if you've got oak trees in your landscape, especially red oaks, and they habitually become infected with the tubercular leaf spot, you might need to know what the soil pH is there. And if that pH is high, then it would need to be lowered, okay, because that's going to help prevent the severity of disease in the future. And finally, I think we're going to wind up with this one last picture right here. This is a shot of a peony, and you'll notice the lesions, the spots here on the peony leaf. They start off a dark color, kind of a purplish red color, deep dark purple, and may get a tan center as that tissue dies. This is something, it's a leaf spot disease called peony leaf blotch. Some folks also refer to it as measles, because of the scattering random pattern of the little red spots across the foliage. It is a fungal disease. It typically occurs or gets worse as the season progresses. It's more of a late season disease that attacks the peonies. Generally always doesn't show up until after a fair amount of time after blooms have already faded away. It can be treated with a fungicide. Mancozeb is a fungicide that's labeled for use against this disease for homeowners to use. But also, there has to be some cultural practices to go along with controlling this disease. Some sanitation, if you will, to manage peony leaf blotch. That foliage needs to be cut down at ground level, either in the fall or in the spring. I probably prefer doing it in the fall of the year, just so that I don't have that plant residue with that fungus laying out there on the ground all winter long. I like to get that litter up, rake it up, cut it off, rake it up, and get it away from there. Probably not send it through the compost pile, but dispose of it some other way. If you don't do it in the fall, for sure do it in the springtime before you start seeing new shoots pop up out of the ground. But get that old infected residue away from there. And then when you do have new foliage come out, you can begin to make some fungicide applications relatively early. I know this particular peony plant, it was treated a few times early in the year. Nothing showing up, and it kind of backed off the treatment of that one. And here in the last few weeks, it started to show a few symptoms. It's not very severe, but it's there. This is a pretty common thing. The good thing is it's not It's kind of like the tobacco leaf spot was. I guess it's usually not a major health concern on the plant. It's real aesthetic, but typically by this time of the year, they will have generated enough energy, created enough energy, and got it socked away there in the root system to ensure that they're going to be coming back next year. Well, folks, I believe that's about all that I've got for you to talk about today on this episode of What's Wrong Now. But as always, if you have a question or if you run across something in your landscape or your garden that you might need some assistance with, you can contact any of us here at the Extension Service Office, any of the agents. Our office number 615-898-7710. If we're not here when you call, leave a message. We'll get that message and we'll certainly get back to you. You can also email me at mmote1@utk.edu if you've got a picture of a pest or maybe a condition on a plant you need some help with. Just feel free to send a good clear picture that shows what the symptoms are you're looking at, and we'll be glad to try to help figure those things out for you. Well, as I said, folks, that's all. I'm going to sign off right here. I hope what you saw here today was of some value to you, and I hope you'll tune in again until next time. But until next time, this is Mitchell Mote from the University of Tennessee and the Tennessee State University Extension Program saying so long.